We're going to do a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'd like to have a moment of silence for those who lost their lives 50 years ago this evening. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. On behalf of the Fridley Historical Society, I'd like to just thank you so much, and you'll get your official welcome from the mayor in a couple minutes. But I want to introduce to you, Mr. Lund will introduce the guest speakers tonight. I have the privilege of introducing someone who's on our board, and he is an author of 2 books written about the tornado. His name is Al Taylor. Al, can you come up, please? And he's kind of getting writer's cramps, but that's okay. He's enjoying himself. 50 years ago today, Fridley had a great leader in Bill Nee on May 6th in 1965. And on this evening, we are blessed to have a great leader too in Mayor Scott Lund. Scott, come on up.
Dorothy, you're always so generous. So this is all it takes is 50 years ago, a tornado hits our town, or actually a series of tornadoes, and now 50 years later, look at the audience here. So that's what it takes to fill this auditorium. I'll bet you the school district is just envious as all get out that we don't fill this the state of this auditorium when there is a high school play going on, and actually they have pretty good performances and at cheap cost. So it's a plug for the school district. So I want to welcome everyone here tonight to share and remember a very horrific events that occurred 50 years ago this evening. And the welcome is extended from the city of Fridley as well as the Fridley Historical Society. And boy, did they do a great job of recording our history. I see a very active former president, Robert Christensen. Robert, raise your hand or stand up and be acknowledged. Those are pretty big shoes to fill. Robert has done a great job in the past for the Historical Society. And Dorothy, I'm pleased to say, is filling those shoes very nicely. But thank you, Robert, for what you did. Al Taylor, as you've all been recognized, has done a great job of recording history of that horrific night. And hopefully many of you will purchase a book from him. He will sign it, autograph it for you. And some of those proceeds do go back to the Historical Society for all the great work that they do. So 50 years ago, seems like a long time, but I'll bet you there are people in the audience that witnessed that, and it doesn't seem that long ago. With that in mind, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people were there that night? Wow. It's amazing you're still all here. And good for you. I've got to imagine that there's some very vivid memories of those events that night. It doesn't seem like it was 50 years ago, and something that many of you will never forget. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of stories and very heroic events that occurred in the aftermath. I can remember a gentleman that I've known for quite a few years in Fridley that talked about how he was at a dinner meeting in northeast Minneapolis, heard about the tornado, came rushing home to find out that his family and his home was largely unscathed by the first tornado. Went back to the meeting in North Minneapolis. By the time he got there, he heard that another tornado had hit Fridley. He came rushing back again, had a heck of a time getting to his home, had to walk up part of the way to find out that he no longer had a home. So that's what I guess you get for leaving after the first one. I don't know. I'd like to share with you just an article that was written back in May of 1965 from The Record, which was the local paper at the time. It's entitled the blow was cushioned. The howling, twisting demons which screamed through Twin Cities suburbs Thursday night, strewing death, injury, and widespread destruction in their hellish wakes, could have caused even greater disaster if it had not been for the untiring and sometimes heroic efforts of many individuals and the organizations they represent. Completely outstanding was the invaluable service furnished by those radio stations which hour after hour charted immediate and potential danger points. Scheduled programming and commercials were totally disregarded as the most successful all-out effort was mounted to inform, alert, and instruct a bewildered and frightened public. It is impossible to evaluate the success of the operation, but it is certain many more persons would have been injured and still others may have been killed if this excellent service had not been provided. Highly commendable also were the efficient performance of civil defense personnel, fire and police departments, utility company workers, Weather Bureau employees, and the trained, experienced physicians, nurses, and hospital personnel who cared for the hundreds of injured victims. Cooperation and coordination of efforts cushioned the blow. It is comforting to know so many interested and efficient persons have our welfare at heart, especially during emergencies. And we can attest to that by tonight, the perseverance, the strength of the people of 1965, many of them here tonight. It is those people, their determination to rebuild has made Fridley a better, stronger community because of those attributes that they carried forward that day. In some ways, Fridley today continues to hold onto that small hometown feel and flair that we've all come to know and recognize. Thank you. And now enough from me. I can honestly tell you that I'm honored and happy to be the current mayor in Fridley. I can't say that I can really say that about back in 1965. So I'm very thankful that Mayor Nee was the mayor back then and not me. But I have my own fires to put out, not tornadoes. Our first speaker tonight is Bob Aldrich, who is a retired Fridley fire chief. His career in the fire department began in 1953 when he moved to Fridley and joined the volunteer fire department. He spent 34 years working with all aspects of fire prevention and safety. Bob was at the fire station the night of the tornadoes and will tell you what happened there on May 6, 1965. Bob? You want to stand? Sit there.
Thank you. I'm going to stay seated because I don't stand very good. They asked me to give you a little insight on how an emergency operation goes on in a fire department in a situation like that, and I can say that we had a foot up on that one because we had gotten toned out for an incident that preceded the big blow, and that got our people to on the way to the station to make the, to be able to make the response. Had they not been able to get there then, 5 minutes later, they probably would have had a terrible time getting there because the tornado had gone through at 7:09. We also had one rig responding to an incident over in the hillside area, and that truck had a bulky hood on it that didn't want to stay latched, and it came unlatched right in front of the Hayes School. And when they stopped to latch the hood, the roof came off of the Methodist church and landed on the road right in front of it. So we were quite lucky there that nobody got hurt. Beyond that, what a fire department does is try to get to people and cover all of the concerns that you would have. We had concerns at Midland Co-op that had a lube oil blending operation going on, the railroad yards with hazardous materials in them, the people, the damage to the homes, and trying to find them. And you get caught up. Emergency responders have a thing what they call a you all come event, and that's what this was. you all come. And I think everybody that had any kind of emergency response training within 50 miles all came. And they brought their relatives with them. So besides getting a lot of help from a lot of different agencies, we also had some horribly traffic problems to deal with. And we tried to move a rescue squad from the Midland Co-op area up to the trailer court on Osborne Road and Highway 65. It took them 30 minutes just because of the traffic. But the problems that we encountered mostly with those huge responses are communication. And gosh, I'm so happy now that the communication systems, you can talk to anybody. As a Fridley Fire Department, we couldn't talk to the Fridley Police Department. We had to go through a third party to do that. To talk to the Bloomington Rescue Squad that was working with us up in this area, we had to go through 5 different agencies to get a message to them and get it back to us. So you can see that there are problems. We worked it. The guys worked real hard. Some of them weren't even aware of what the status of their own homes were until later in the evening. Probably around 11 o'clock, 11:30, we kind of slowed her down. We thought we had a pretty good feel that we didn't have anybody that we couldn't find, or the families knew where they were. So we kind of took the position that we're going to shut her down. We're going to go into a soft mode. We kept 2 or 3 rescue squads handy, and we just did some soft patrolling through the neighborhoods, and if we heard anything that didn't sound right, we'd bring a squad in and start picking. After that was all done, you know, the other thing that we got involved in is we probably helped with global warming when we burned that 3-story pile of rubble up in Lock Park for 6 weeks. But that's what we did, and it came out well. None of our people got hurt. We didn't lose any of our equipment. And all in all, the fellows that I worked with did a real good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And now from the ringing of the phone, I would suggest that all of us have cell phones, so out of courtesy, please turn them off or down to vibrate. Thank you. Our next presenter or speaker is Don Myers. He's retired after a 34-year career with the Fridley School District 14. He served in many capacities at the high school and at the junior high middle school. On May 6th, he was Fridley School's athletic director and wrestling coach. Don is here tonight to tell us about what happened to the schools in Fridley that evening. Don?
Thank you very much, and good evening. And thanks to all the former students who stopped by to say hi. In fact, there were about 4 of them that I absolutely had no idea who they were, because I was the assistant principal here for so long. I said, the reason I can't remember you is you were not my client. But thank you for stopping me. It's my pleasure as a former employee. By the way, if it doesn't get loud enough, or if I'm too loud, let me know, please. But I was an employee of the school district from 1958 to 1992. And I'm delighted to be a part of this program to celebrate the strength and cooperative nature of the friendly Fridley folks, right? But before I begin my formal remarks, I have 3 things that I need to say. First and foremost, I want to thank the Fridley History Center for their efforts in preserving and protecting our past. How blessed we are. How blessed we are to have an organization like that, and they work awfully hard. Secondly, I want to thank 5 of my former colleagues for giving me some information about which to talk this evening. We all have our own stories, but I was interested in talking to some of my former colleagues to see what they remembered. First and foremost, Dr. Lee Switzer, still a Fridley resident, former elementary principal, some of you may remember him. Don Holm, the chairman of the Fridley Business Department, and he is still a resident here in Fridley. Richard Stanton, the former high school principal in 1965. Bob Barnett, who you know in a variety of capacities, but he was a teacher and a counselor here at Fridley High School in 1965. And Walt Wenholz, who was a math teacher and a baseball coach and an assistant wrestling coach as well. But I thank each of them for the information that I'll be talking about tonight. Lastly, I'd like to make one correction. Maybe I should say, in the spirit of the historical accuracy, I was not the principal at Fridley Junior High in 1965. That was Carl Larson. You remember Carl lived over across the creek. I don't know what the name of that street is, but anyway, Carl was the principal. I became the principal of that building in 1982, but I wasn't that person in 1965. Having said those things, let me get on with my comments. I'm going to start by talking about May 7th, because May 7th was the morning after. And WCCO announced that the Fridley schools would be closed that day because of the storm damage from the night before. Teachers were told to report to their building principals to assist assessing damage, helping clean up, and assist with security of the building. They were told they would need to show identification to get into the city. You all remember what that was like. I saw how many hands went up, so I know you remember what that was like. Superintendent John K. Hansen called a meeting that morning with elementary and secondary principals. There were 7 guys in that meeting. He asked each of them to describe the damage sustained in their buildings and what ideas they had for accommodating students for the remaining 15 days of school. Back in those days, Fridley historically ended the school year before Memorial Day. So it wasn't that long from the tornado to the end of school, but it was 15 days. And he also indicated at that time that school was going to start Monday. And you could have seen the jaws of those principals drop. And he said, you'll get to know some of the workmen very well because they're going to be merged with your students. Anyway, let's see. Oh, and the other piece of that, is that we had no cell phones, we had no websites, we didn't have really any means of communication. Bob was talking about the communication between the police and fire and all of that, and how difficult that was. Well, I know there are other stations here tonight, so I'm not trying to just build the ego of WCCO, but in that point in time, I don't know what we would have done without WCCO radio and the communications from them. The principals reported that the good news was 2 elementary schools were untouched by the storms. Riverwood, which was up in the northwest, and surprisingly Rice Creek over on the east side, which isn't there anymore, but it was hardly damaged at all, and there was an awful lot of destruction just to the west of it. But those 2 schools had little or no damage, and they had a little extra space, which we were going to need. The other good news was that Fridley, if you remember, this building was built, or we occupied it in 1962, and the junior high was added onto. And both buildings had a lot of extra space because Fridley was growing as a community. We had a lot of young kids in the pipeline, and the school district wisely built this high school to accommodate 1,400 kids. At the time, we had probably 800. So we had an elementary wing down on the south side. The junior high had a elementary wing and some extra classrooms. So the Hayes School, which was totally destroyed, was hit by 2 tornadoes. Those kids ended up going to Riverwood, some of them half days at Riverwood. It seems to me the Riverwood kids went in the afternoon, the Hayes kids went in the morning. I think that's right. It's a 50% chance of being right. But they were on split shifts. The fun part of the whole thing, in talking with Don Holum, he said his son Scott, who was in kindergarten, went to Hayes Annex. Hayes Annex, the History Center, as you know it today, built in 1924. It sat right alongside of the building that was totally demolished. Tells you about the vagaries of a tornado. Either that or the sturdiness of the buildings. But the Fridley High School and Parkview Elementary had some pretty severe roof and glass damage. Structurally, they were okay, but the roofs were pretty well torn off of the better part of Parkview. That was closed completely, and Lee Switzer's comments later, he'll tell you that those kids from Parkview were sent to the junior high elementary and merged with those kids. Some of them probably came up here to the high school elementary as well. The high school really didn't have much structural damage other than great parts of the roof. The gym roof was pretty well gone. All of the windows along the west and south side were just blown through. Walt Wenholz's comment in here later, which I'll mention now because it seems appropriate, he said he was in the rooms that the windows face south, big windows, and the glass was all over against the north wall. He said everything just exploded over there, and there was a 15-inch shard of glass that was stuck in the closet of his room when he walked in there the next morning. So some tremendous force. Let me go back to Hayes School for a second. That building, those of you who are young enough don't remember, it was built with a product called cinder block, which is a lightweight concrete block, and apparently didn't have great structural integrity. I think that's the way to say that. But it was hit by the first tornado and the second one, or at least 2 of the whatever tornadoes we had, and pretty well leveled it. And then shortly after this meeting that Dr. Hansen had with the principals, he met with Mayor Nee. Mayor Nee said, "We're condemning it." And John Hansen, I think, had bulldozers in there on Sunday. And interestingly, the Anoka School District had just built a school very similar, well, not similar, identical to what is now Hayes School, this round school. And the Anoka District gave Fridley the architectural plans to build that school. And again, from Dr. Switzer's comments, you'll remember that if you went to Hayes back in 1965-66, you came back to that building in January of 1966. May, January, a brand new school was built. And just months of time were saved simply because of the willingness of the Anoka district to share those. So anyway, thanks, Anoka. let's see, what building haven't I talked? The junior high, you'll remember from a lot of the articles, and thanks to the press for all of the wonderful coverage of this these events all week long. It's been just amazing. But Fridley Junior High was holding an art and science fair that Thursday night, and thankfully a lot of the people who would normally have attended were smart and stayed home, because the storm did a lot of damage on the west and south side of that building. But the impact on the students, I think everyone was surprised that school was going to start Monday. I know the teachers and the principals sure were. But incredibly, the schools got cleaned up between the workers, the teachers, and volunteers. Dick Stanton, in talking to him, the principal, he said, you can't believe how many people showed up with their wheelbarrows and a rake and a shovel. He said we had them all over the building, just volunteers who just showed up and helped a lot. And ultimately, the damage estimate I've seen in the news this week again, but it was $5 million in 1965 dollars. Just to put that in perspective, I was teaching, and I started teaching here in '58, and I was making $3,600. In 1965, I think I'd gotten up to $5,800. So, and I say that for no reason other than to give you an idea of what $5 million represented. Just incredible damage. And anyway, off one day and back to school on Monday. I was not able to determine how all necessary communication was accomplished, but I suspect WCCO played a big role in that. I've already said that. Parkview was closed. Dr. Switzer informed me that those students were added to the junior high elementary for the last 15 days. There were those empty rooms at the junior high. Fridley High School had to modify student schedules as a part of that building was closed. The rest of the building was determined safe and usable. Fridley High School kids came in for 15-minute classes. We bussed them in. There were no lights, but the classrooms had these big, some of them had big windows, some of them had big plywood. But bussed the kids in for 15 minutes. They were here for about 2 hours and 15 minutes and sent home with their assignments for the next day. They're brought back the next day, turn in your assignment, here's your next one, go home. And of course you can imagine how kids felt not being able to stick around school on a spring day. Anyway, we had buckets everywhere. As I say, these flat roofs are wonderful until you get a hole in them. And we had holes all over from debris. Students were resilient. School year finished without an incident. And to the delight of most of the students, many teachers did not require final exams. Baccalaureate was held at Columbia Heights High School. Commencement was at Brooklyn Center. You thought you were going to get me, didn't you? But we thank both Columbia Heights and Brooklyn Center for helping us out. Workers replaced windows, roofs, ceiling tile all summer. School started on time in the fall amid the workers because they were still here into the winter time. Quotes from my colleagues. Dorothy, how am I doing? I'm running over. I'll make it quick. You knew I was going to, didn't you? Lee Switzer said he'd been elementary principal for the Fridley Junior High and Fridley Senior High elementaries. And high school, or the junior high cafeteria lost its wall, its west wall. I don't remember this. But he said all we did was put up canvas and we continued to serve meals. I'm not sure how the state health department liked that, but that's what we did. You had to feed kids. On the evening of May 6th, the junior high was scheduled for a science fair. Thankfully, many parents stayed home. Immediately after the tornado struck, this is Switzer talking. Immediately after the tornado struck, I attempted to drive to the junior high. Now, he lives down here on 7th Street. It netted me 3 flat tires before I got to the junior high. Driving by Parkview, it was easy to see the entire roof of the gym and cafeteria were missing. Turning on 61st off of 7th, I discovered the entire roof had been picked up as one piece and thrown against the northeast side of the school. I'm skipping ahead here. Don Holum's comment, Hayes School is right across the street from our home on Monroe. It was hit by both the first and second tornadoes. Hayes students and teachers were assigned to other buildings. We had every window in our home blown out. The detached garage was blown away, and our car was turned sideways on the slab. Someone's 18-foot fishing boat was hanging on our backyard clothes pole. And Don Holum literally dragged, Mike Leslie was here in the district at the time, and they lived a little further west of him. And their home was blown away by the first tornado. And they came over, Holum went over to his house and brought them back to his house. And shortly after they got in the house, Joyce said, "Oh God, my purse is at home." She was going out the door and down Holum's driveway when he caught up to her, and he said she literally was kind of skipping along, kind of light-footed, the storm's effect. And he said he grabbed her by the shoulders and drug her back into the basement, shut the door, went downstairs, and just as he was going downstairs, he looked across the street, and the last piece of Hayes School was going northeast. Bob Barnett said he had been down in his basement after the first tornado. You probably read this in the Star. But he said he came up and he could see all the way to University Avenue from Jackson. And he said, normally I had houses blocking me, but he could see. And there were 5 houses that were normally blocking him that were no longer there. I'm hurrying, Dorothy. Walt Wenholz's story was he was coaching baseball, and in those days they played down here on the Commons. And they got the game done with St. Paul Park, and the clouds were, that ugly grain green stuff. And he said they ran up here to the gym and down into the locker room just in time, and they could hear lots of noise and whatever. When they walked out of the locker room, they could look right up through the gym ceiling to the sky, and the rain was pouring in. But it was quite a time. Dick Stanton had been downtown Minneapolis to a junior achievement banquet. We had an active JA chapter here in school, and he got the call from his daughter that said the tornadoes have hit Fridley. So he came home as quickly as he could, but both tornadoes had gone through at the time. And he said he could only get as far as Mississippi because the rest of Moon Plaza was laying across University Avenue. He had to walk there, and then when he tried to come to the high school, he couldn't get here because they wanted some ID, and he'd left his ID at home. So he didn't see his school till the next morning. Anyway, the Fridley tornado was a significant event. Those of you who are National Geographic people recognize this is from April 1972. Page 549 in there shows some area over along Rice Creek that was devastated, as we know. Other couple quick comments. The Fridley football field out here has a scoreboard that the Fridley State Bank had donated at one time. And when I looked the next morning, the scoreboard had been torn off of these 8-inch I-beams, steel I-beams, and they were twisted. And up against the water tower, which is across 61st, was the red and green paint that had been on that scoreboard. So I was always amazed by Just that incredible force. But the other part of it is I came up here the next morning and the gymnasium has a sunken floor. And that day it truly had a sunken floor because there were about 10 inches of water in there. And the floor had these beautiful waves of hardwood. Anyway, enough of my ranting. Thank you for the opportunity. May 6th was a horrific event, caused a lot of damage, did a lot of grief to people. But I ultimately, as Scott said, it just made us stronger. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Don. Great, good job. Don is very interesting, but quite chatty. You'd think he was a mayor or something. Excellent job, Don. Our next presenter is now retired, but was the mayor of Moundsview on that Thursday. And Don Hodges is here to tell us about his city and the loss and destruction that was suffered there in Moundsview. Don?
Good evening. I just want to say that I sure appreciate being here tonight with the people from Fridley and also with Al Taylor there, who took so many years evidently to develop the book. And it was great reading the stories of the people coming. And in our city, your city, Moundsview, Fridley, Spring Lake Park, you read the same lot, similar stories where you wonder how in the world people even survived when you see it. That night, I was at a scout meeting in Spring Lake Park Lutheran Church, which was on Hillview Road and Red Oak Drive there. And one of the fellows went out, I think he had to have one of these smokes, heard on the radio that tornadoes were dancing around the Twin Cities. And so he came back in and he told us, and then the lights kind of went out. I don't know if the coffee got made or not, but anyway, I told my wife, we had a quick kind of a lunch. I'm heading home to check on the kids, you know, to make sure we get to the basement and so forth. Well, I left, and then my wife rode home with a different scout leader, and the scout leader, and then they had to stop and pick up some chairs off of the road. And I was wondering, evidently there was an earlier tornado before I saw the big black cloud coming out of Fridley, and we ran down to our basement. And the funniest thing when I was reading through all his stories, the different things that people say, what happened, like some say it sounded like a freight train coming down. One fellow I was reading here in Fridley said it sounded like a thrash machine. I figured he was raised on a farm because you got to go back a few years to hear a thrash machine. But you'd hear all these different comments, but it sounded like one fella there in our community said it sounded like somebody was pulling a bunch of nails out of his home and that. So each one of us. But anyway, that night, after it was over, I came upstairs. Then I heard that Moundsview was hit, and so I was just over by the Sunnyside School area, so home wasn't hit or anything, and I had to hustle and get over and find out what was going on. And what happened was when I come out of Fridley, if you recall, there used to be old pole yards over there in that area where Medtronics is, and it came across there in that area there, a big black cloud came across right there and hit the Messiah Church. And that's on County Road H over in there. Went northeast, crossed Moundsview. Now in those days, we didn't have an awful lot of homes in those areas, but there on Silverview Road, homes were hit, and the church, a Tom Thumb, and a lumberyard, where one of the gentlemen did get caught and had lost his life. Then they cut across Mounds View there, and in those days we still had farms. When I came out of St. Paul and came home from work, you had the smell and aroma of a hog farm even. But the Johnson farm was right there in the center of it, and went right on across. And then they cut across where our shopping center is. There was nothing but trees in those days there. And then hit the Methodist Church on the corner of Long Lake Road and County Road I. Then it must have bounced up, and then it really came down in what we call the Lowest Knollwood area there in Mounds View. And I got quite a kick out of once in a while. I would see that we got pictured with Fridley. Our road would be in there. And I thought, well, we all have the same problems. Doesn't make any difference. So anyway, the thing with me, we have to, as mayors, councilmen, figure out where do you start. You kind of, in those days, there isn't step 1, 2, or 3. Your adrenaline's going. And I got over to the city hall, and there was no telephones or anything. So I went over to the tornado area there and saw the disaster, and I couldn't believe it. And it looked worse than what I had seen when I was in the military. And I don't think any storm can do any more damage than a tornado when I saw that. Anyway, I didn't know what to do, and so I headed back to home, got on the telephone. I called the state emergency services, let them know what was going on. And then I had friends in the National Guard, and I was worried about security, because in those days, Mounds View was only 7 years old at that time. And we only had a couple of police units, and they were busy hauling people up to Mercy Hospital or somewhere. And we had a nice civil defense group that come in and helped us that evening and stuff and helped get things going. But anyway, I called the National Guard, and they said, well, they're on the way out already. So I thought, well, great. And then so I thought, well, now what do I do? So I head back over, and sure enough, I couldn't believe it. Around 9 o'clock in there somewhere was Carl Rovog, National Guard, and he walked up, and we looked over the area, and he couldn't believe it. And we talked about government and getting help, to take care of this disaster and stuff. So I didn't know what else to do afterwards. I went back home. I called our city attorney. He lived in Arden Hills. And then I called the council members and said, as soon as that sun's up in the morning, we've got to have a meeting. We've got to look to see what happened. And so that morning, we made up a team there, and we went through. And we made up a list of the disaster area, the homes and stuff. And while we were going through making up this list, we ran into insurance fellows that are already talking there, trying to settle up with people. Well, we politely told them they would have to leave until we made this disaster list and found out what was damaged, what was destroyed, and so forth. So I called, I think his name was Cy Magnuson, the state commissioner, insurance commissioner, and from city. And then when I got home at noon for lunch, he called me and said, we have it squared away. The insurance people will come through your city hall before they can come into the area and have to wait until we get this completed, the damage list. And I thought that was very nice, considerate of him to do that, because when you get through with a group, for instance, the group that morning that decided we would, the village council, we were a village then, and the village attorney, we had the health officer, the building inspector, electrical inspector, and I just walked along behind. Because I didn't know, how do you mark a house damaged, destroyed, and so forth. But that was quite a job to do that. And I'm sure Bill Nee, your mayor who I knew, and he used to ride a motorcycle. I was kind of a friend of his. At times they would visit, and we talked about the different situations during these days. But anyway, to make a story kind of short here and stuff, to kind of catch up with the other people here, was the disaster there. For some reason, we lost 5 people. And it proved to us, you know, over the years that if people do get below ground and in that basement, stay there, even though you might get a 2x4 on your head or a cement block, or you know what I mean, it's building block or something, your life, you can save your life by listening to those sirens and heading for the basement. We were very fortunate to have a place to go. WCCO, thank goodness, that the scout leader went out and listened to his radio and came back and let us know. But then the next thing we had to do at that meeting was decide a disaster plan of how we're going to clean this thing up. So we went ahead and drew up a declaration type of thing that the state wanted you to fill in and stuff. We put in there that the trash, you know, from refrigerators and that we had rodent problems, and we really rattled it on to make it so we were sure our federal disaster people would help us out. We went ahead, hired a contractor so we could clean up that area right away. We had no money to pay for it. We didn't know how we were going to pay for it. We just had faith in our government, and thank goodness they came through. And I think here in Fridley probably had the same thing. Fill out the disaster, you had to work. How are we going to clean up this mess, you know? And that was the biggest thing. And we were very thankful for the National Guard. We closed off the area, and then we set up a pass system. And to get in, you had to come over, and I had to sign a pass that looked like this here and had my name on it. It said, the bearer of this card is a Mounds View disaster victim, and that way, and I signed it. Well, when I went to go back into the area the next day, we had the National Guard there because we had so few police to close off our area and keep the people out, and I couldn't get in myself. I had to go back and write myself a pass. And I couldn't believe it. But anyway, these are little things that happen. We were very fortunate, like I say, that our people came through. That night out there talking to our Governor Carl Rovog, and he was sure if we got that declaration in that we would probably get some financial help. And I couldn't remember all the years, you know, go by. I have a hard time keeping track of my coffee cup. I don't know if you people do as you get older, but try to remember everything. So I thought, I'll pull out a paper and take a look at it here. And here's Governor Rovog surveying and telling about he was out there till 3:30 a.m. And then he was back with a team again the next day. So I admire a governor like that. Like I said, I go on here talking, but I have one thing I want to ask you. And I think somebody said a lot of you were students back then in school. And being a former teacher myself, I was teaching biology when I was younger, and we always have to quiz everybody. So I was wondering, do you know how much a 10-pound sack of potatoes, red potatoes, cost then? Can you remember that far back? Anybody got an idea? It says 79 cents. That was on the back of Carl Rovog, and them guys in Humphrey was telling about going to come. But I just happened to see it, and it kind of struck me kind of funny, you know, really. But it says here that golden bananas, 3 pounds 4. How much you get 3 pounds of bananas at that time? 25 cents. And then they go on and tell about radish or green onions. You got 2 for 9 since. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because I thought when you're thumbing through there and I was reading about Fridley and all the different things, and then I realized that all of us have that same problem, and thank the good Lord, I do anyway, that we didn't lose more people. Like I say in Mounds View, I think if we would have stayed below ground, we lost 5 people, and then there was a young man that was following kind of the tornadoes or something, shot up Highway 10. 10 in Mounds View was found dead. So with that, I just want to thank you for letting me tell you a little bit about Mounds View and our problems. And like I say, we're similar, and I enjoyed reading a lot of the stories in Alan Taylor's book. Thank you.
Don't take my papers. There you go. Yeah. Funny how you gravitate from a tornado to pretty soon we're getting the grocery list, right? But one comment that Mr. Hodges made about, about getting down during a tornado, and of course we all know that, but nowadays with all the communication and the social media and all the other forms of communication that we have, I can imagine most of us will be out there probably taking photos or videos off their cell phones rather than protecting yourself. So don't do that. Our next presenter is Rob Brown, who is now retired, of course, but worked for the WCCO radio back in 1965, and he helped get the information out about the locations of the tornadoes to the reporters at the time, Dick Chapman and Charlie Boone, which ultimately helped save a lot of lives. Rob's here to tell us all about that longest night.
When you watch the weather these days on television, when you watch the weather on TV tonight, about $1 billion worth of equipment goes into it, and Belinda Jensen stands in front of a green screen, and she points to towns, and we now know millions of bits about the weather just about every hour. So what I thought you'd like to see is all of the technical equipment that Dick Chapman had that night. He did have headphones on. That's the way he could hear the people on the other end of the line. But honest to goodness, which was the name of the stupid quiz show that he used to do every night, this is all he had, was the back panel of the highway department map and one ballpoint pen. I want to give you what I call some frames of reference to try to take you back to 1965. Boy, were we running on barbed wire in those days compared to where we are now. There were no cell phones, thank God, maybe. Telephones in cars weighed about 50 pounds, and the equipment went in the car, and there was literally a dial that you dialed, and there was a giant handset. That's how that kind of thing was in those days. I went to the New York World's Fair in 1965, and one of the great exhibits was touch-tone dialing. In 1965, we were still doing this to make a call, unless we were asking for the operator on a party line. Color TV was only 4 years old at KSTP television, and every other station was black and white. There were no FM stations in the Twin Cities with any measurable audience. Yay! I-94 was 1 year old. The Twins were 4 years old. The Vikings were 3 years old. There were no North Star hockey team yet. Not all of America was covered by zip codes for mail, and not all of America was covered by area codes for telephones. Lyndon Baines Johnson was president. As has been mentioned, Carl Rolvog was our governor. But the most important thing about the night for us at the radio station is that there was only one radar screen in Minneapolis-St. Paul at the airport. No radio stations or television stations had radar, and now we carry it in our cell phones. How in the hell did we do what we did that night? And I want you to know that we didn't know what we were doing. I will take credit for this. The spring of 1965 had us punch drunk at CCO Radio. On St. Patrick's Day, we had one of the biggest blizzards ever. The snow in front of the station on 2nd Avenue South looked like the Colorado would flood. There were no cars moving. Plasma was being run around the Twin Cities by snowmobile from hospital to blood bank and whatnot. And then we had the old-time floods, April 15, the 1965 floods. I was in Chaska the morning the dikes broke, and Chaska lost 3 houses, but it gained 3. So it was an absolute switch. We did a few things to get ready for the tornado, but how could we ever know what would happen? It had been the station's procedure every spring to send out a red tornado warning card in the mail to all of the principals on our school closing list, which was about 1,500, maybe some hospitals included. And the red card said, go to the southwest corner of the basement, which is no longer true. Stay away from the window, get some furniture. You've heard all those things. We would send that out and hope that it would be posted on a school bulletin board or in a hospital public area. On April 23rd, by the way, my title at the station was the Associate Director of Audience Promotion. Now think for a few seconds. Audience promotion. How in the hell could I promote any more audience for WCCO radio? We had nearly 70% of the radios turned on, thank heavens, when it came to that night. Yes, we had 1 million more listeners every week than all the other stations in town, which I still can't believe. And the one that I like the most, because I was a New Yorker who had just moved here, we had the largest audience in the CBS radio network. Not pine trees and not cows, but the largest number of people listening to any one station in the CBS network, New York and LA included. That made us very happy. After we sent out the cards to all the schools about tornado warning, we cut the discs. In those days, our equipment was so old-fashioned at the radio station that we had a disc cutter, which actually made a disc recording. A green disc could be grabbed in master control and put on the turntable, and it had that awful noise in it that we made with a CBS ashtray and a great big degaussing magnet that erased tapes. The purpose of the horrible sound was to rise above where you normally had your radio, in the car or in home, if you were in your kitchen working, if you were doing laundry, if you were in your shop, in your barn. We needed something that was so damn irritating and raucous that somebody would say, oh, there they go again, blowing that damn whistle. Well, it must have worked because we used it an awful lot that night. On April 23rd, we cut the green disc, which meant tornado watch, the blue disc, which meant tornado warning, and we cut the red disc, which meant a tornado was entering the Twin Cities area. Ray Christensen, God bless him, he's still alive. He did the voicing. I wrote the script and he did the voicing. And the engineer, Harry Peterson, most beloved little guy in the world, said, why do we cut a red disc every year? You're wasting a perfectly good disc. There will never be a tornado in the Twin Cities. At the radio station, we were terrified of the license we held. Licensing by the federal government meant that you would do what you were supposed to do. And literally it said, you have to do what you say you're going to do when you do an application every 4 years. Doing the application was cold beads of sweat on our head because we had to go back and the FCC had already picked random days in the last 4 years of the radio station, picked out of a hat. We had to look into the logs and say, oh my God, what did we do that day in terms of public service? What did we do that day in terms of discussion? What did we do in nerves? The motto of the station and of all broadcasters in America was, serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. I think we did on the night of May 6, 1965. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I got a call at my desk. I was a member of the gray flannel psychological warfare outfit out at Fort Snelling in my Army Reserve capacity. We were the madmen of 1965. And it said, grab everything that looks like military and put on your fatigues and get out to the 934th Air Squadron at Fort Snelling as fast as you can, which I did. So I left the station at 4, went home, got dressed in my khakis, my fatigues, and went to Fort Snelling, or to the 934th Air Squadron. When I came out, I guess I could get my mind off having met the conditions of the drill. When I came out, it was as humid as it could be, the sky was as green as it could be, and the sirens went off. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck like that night.
Yeah, so much for technology, right?
I turned on the car radio in my 56 Buick, and the static between Coon Rapids, the transmitter, and Fort Snelling was incredible. But I could hear the red disc on the air and thought, my God, what is this about? Harry Peterson told me we'd never have a tornado in the Twin Cities. I do not remember driving to the station. I don't think I hit anybody. I don't remember. I probably roared down Hiawatha at about 100 miles an hour from the station. By the time I got to the station, and by the way, there were only 5 of us inside the station all night, and there were about 4 or 5 members of the staff who called in from wherever they were that night and were very helpful. Chuck Littlegren up on this end. Chuck went to the garage downtown and grabbed the mobile unit with the big call letters on it and came up here and started feeding stuff in. John Walker was one of our newsmen, and so were several other people. By the time I got there, Dick and Charlie had already moved into the large studio, Studio 2, which was the orchestra studio from the old days of Wally Olson and Cedric Adams, etc. And all we had to go on was wire copy from Associated Press and the Weather Bureau. I do not know when the bolt of genius came crashing through the night, and Dick Chapman said, if you're in a safe place and you can see something that relates to the tornado, give us a call at 339-9111. That was literally the telephone number for the stupid, silly quiz show that we put on every night, called Honest to Goodness, with the King's Ransom prize of $8.30 if you answered the question correctly. Charlie and Dick were labor announcers and I was management. But we kind of fuzzed that line back and forth. I was very involved with setting up fishing openers and hunting openers and the state fair and a lot of other stuff because I couldn't promote any more audience. I had to do something for my pay. I guess I was what we now call a call screener. Nowadays, when you call a talk show, there's somebody who's not on the air who takes your call, sizes you up, and decides to put you on the air. Maybe we took 200 calls that night. There was one crank, quack call in the whole group. And I think it's a great benefit to you all, to our Northern European sense of community and caring for one another, that people who really did see something could calmly report what they were looking at. Now, the truth is that what Dick did that night is took this mighty piece of technology with a ballpoint pen, and by the way, the tape recording of the night is on radiotapes.com, radiotapes.com. And by the way, also just today, the Weather Bureau published the most amazing 80-page report about the tornado, just came out today. It's got, when you see it online, it's got radar moving. It's got pictures galore, 80 pages. It's amazing. Weather Bureau today. What Dick did is said, okay, you're in Excelsior, and you see something moving away from you to the northeast. And you're in Hopkins, and you see something moving to the east. And Dick would have to say, that must be the same funnel. I mean, that's where we were. That must be the same funnel. So Dick would then say, if you're in St. Louis Park or Edina, you might want to think of taking coverage. Now that is the revolution of what happened that night. The news department hated what we were doing. The engineering department was miffed that we were actually putting telephones on the air. I'm dead serious. Dick invented early warning for a tornado that night in his head and in his heart, and with a ballpoint pen and a map. And suddenly, the world of tornadoes went from reporting the damage the morning after, which could be neatly done, and copy could be written, and tape recordings could be played, and wouldn't it be neat, and we could stick in a sponsor's commercial, and everything would be hunky-dory. Well, that sure as hell wouldn't have worked that night. What had to work that night is no commercials for 5.5 hours, and I don't think any of the three of us went to the bathroom for 5.5 hours. We did a live play-by-play of what was going on outside. Now, the thing that did amaze us is we thought one tornado was it. And we started to get information from the Weather Bureau that said, there's another tornado coming. Well, that happened 6 times. Back to my notes real quick. Joe Strube at the Weather Bureau told us afterward, and I found this very hard to believe until a few weeks ago, that we saved 2,000 souls that night. The reason I found it so hard to believe is it just seemed to be an impossible number of people. Now that I realize that the tornadoes ran for 35 miles from Arlington Green Isle to Mounds View, that there were 6 different systems, 24 reported touchdowns. It was one of the worst breakouts of tornadoes in the history of the country. So maybe we did save 2,000 souls. One more quick funny bit. Joe Strube later told us that as he stood at the radar at the airport and heard what we were saying on the air or what the listeners were saying, it was a perfect match. We couldn't know that night. But it said to him, this is amazing. He said, the listeners are telling us where the meteorological events are taking place, and the radar can confirm it. He did something pretty mean that night. He transmitted what we were saying to all the other stations in town and said, according to WCCO radio. Let me close out by saying one more thing. We started on the air about 6:30. I got there about 7. We didn't stop until 1:45 to midnight. We stayed in the same room. And when we were coming out, there's a picture of me with a lot of brown hair, and I look terribly young because I was. As we finally walked out of the studio and we were standing in the lobby, Dick said to me, do you realize what journalistic risks we took tonight? And I said, no, because I didn't. My definition of heroism is, you know you're going to get killed, but you do it anyway. That's what Dick did that night. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for sharing your stories of the events that night. It's pretty amazing when you start talking about technology then and today. So much is taken for granted. And boy, are they great when they work, and is it hell when they don't. Our next presenter is the current Public Safety Director of the Fridley Police Department. Don Abbott would like to speak about Police Chief Everett, also known as Mac McCarthy back then, and his strength and spirit on that day in May 6th. Don would also like to take a moment to let the community know about the upgrade of our current siren system here in Fridley. Don?
Thank you, Mayor. I am a kind of a last-minute addition to your program, and when I got the call, I think on Friday, all I can when somebody named Dorothy calls you and asks you to come be part of her tornado event, I felt I had to say yes. So. As Fridley's Director of Public Safety, I also, in addition to overseeing the police department as the police chief, look after emergency management. Back, you heard Chief Aldrich talk about civil defense. That is what has evolved now into emergency management, emergency preparedness, a couple different names. So I understand what the volunteers did, what the police officers, what the firefighters did that night in 1965. Dorothy asked me to speak, tell a story about our police chief at the time, Mac, or Everett McCarthy. And Mac lived over at 6830 Oakley Street at the time. Mac had already retired before I started here, and he passed a few years ago. But best just to read the little bit of the story here about Chief McCarthy. Police Chief Everett McCarthy showed amazing strength and perseverance on that night. This quote from Mayor Bill Nee: "I arrived at City Hall just after the third twister cleared the city. The building had been severely damaged. Fire engines were buried in debris. Other emergency vehicles were crippled. But even then, standby generators had our radio communications back in operation. The scene was grim, yet there was the police chief huddled over the radio, calling in standby reserves from neighboring communities, assigning work areas as men and machines poured in." From another account, Police Chief Everett McCarthy's own home at 6830 Oakley Street had been destroyed by the storms on May 6th. On May 7th, he was directing more than 200 rescue workers from what was left of the one-year-old City Hall, where one wall had collapsed. This is just one of many stories of the spirit of our first responders at the time that made it possible for Fridley to get back on its feet as quickly as it did. And if we could take just one moment, do we have any Fridley police officers, firefighters, civil defense, police reserves at the time, National Guard members who worked that night in the audience tonight? Howie Simonson, I see a few. And just wanted to say thanks to those folks. I've worked those. I've worked windstorms, tornadoes, the windstorm here in Fridley of 05, the tornado of 86 up at Springbrook, the tornado of 2011 that was very, very close in its path to the 1965 tornadoes. Sergeant Jim Mork with us tonight was on duty and actually captured that tornado on his squad video camera up on 694. So understanding what everybody went through and what it takes to get a community back in those situations gives me a real appreciation for what everyone did in 1965. Some of the cops that were working at the time, when I started, I've only been here 30 years, but they talked about some of their memories being that the city that they knew so well and could drive around was totally unrecognizable. The landmarks were gone, the street signs were largely gone, the houses were gone. They could drive down a street that the day before they would have not even had to look at the street sign to know where they were. They didn't know what street they were on. They talked about all the tires that they went through. Roofing nails seemed to be the big one. The shingles held the nails straight up, and the squad car tires found those things very, very quickly. To this day, we plan to have additional tires available in case anything happens, based on what we know from that night. Another story, Fred Biebensee, if you remember, told me the story of Officer Dick Huss, who was in his squad car, and Fred remembers it being a Plymouth or a Chrysler of the time. Dick was right in front of the fire department when the first twister hit, and reported that his squad car was literally picked up to about the level of the roof of the fire department and dropped back to the ground. And the car was severely damaged. Dick was not injured and was able to walk away from that crash. My personal favorite, and I cannot vouch for the veracity of the story, but they talk about a looter that was put into our municipal jail at the time. Now we jail in Anoka, but our municipal jail. And in all of the activity that went on might have been overlooked for a day. And when somebody finally remembered to go check on the prisoner, he was still there. Hadn't been checked on for a day. And of course the cops at the time, you know, on one hand are probably thinking, boy, are we in trouble for this? But in typical cop fashion, reacted very well, let the guy out and said, all right, we're gonna let you go with a warning this time. Don't come back and don't do it again. So unless that person's in the audience tonight, we've never heard from them again. So finally, just to let you know, as the mayor mentioned, we've taken warning sirens very seriously in Fridley ever since this event, definitely. I grew up in Fargo-Moorhead. If anyone is familiar with the Fargo tornado in 1957, I understand what it's like to grow up in a community where something like that has happened, a tornado very similar to what happened in Fridley 8 years later. And watching the way your parents react, your neighbors react, your brothers and sisters who lived through that definitely gave me an appreciation for that. So when about our sirens were about 24, 25 years old, when last year we were discussing it in the police department, do we need to upgrade our sirens? We're starting to get some issues with reliability. And I asked our staff to go ahead and research that. And they came up with a cost to replace all 8 sirens of about $143,000. And that's a significant amount of money. We own those sirens, the city of Fridley does. We maintain them. We pay to have them operated and kept up to date. And you know, they said, that's a lot of money, Chief. Do you think we should go ahead? And I said, absolutely. I said, in Fridley, we'll never have a problem upgrading our warning sirens. We went to the mayor and the council and we said we have a plan. Over 3 years, we'd like to spend about $45,000 per year to upgrade our sirens. Council came back and said, should we do it all this year? And we said, no, we're okay doing it over 3 years. So where we're at right now, just to let you know, last year in 2014, all 8 warning sirens have had their total working mechanisms. So the control boards and the motors that really make it work have all been updated to the newest wireless digital communication, and all the motors have been replaced. The batteries for backup are new, and all the working gear was replaced last year. This year, we're replacing 4 of the actual sirens, the big horn part that you see, and that raises the volume of the sirens from 127 decibels to 130. That is enough to be very noticeable. If you've noticed the sirens seem louder this year, they are. Half of them, 4 of them, have new bells on those. The other 4 get replaced next year. And we're happy to report that they're all working without a hitch. The new control boards are working fine. So you can have very, very high confidence in your 8 warning sirens that cover the entire city. Okay? So we're happy to report that. The last thing is just to mention that you also now have access, we all do, to wireless emergency alerts on our cell phones. You may have seen Amber alerts on them and different weather alerts. Wherever you are, as long as you're in an area and you're with a cell company that's covered, you should be getting alerts specific to that area. So if you're traveling, let's say Dorothy's traveling in Kansas, and her cell phone, there's a tornado somewhere in her area. If she's in the warning area, her cell phone should pick that up and warn her specifically, you are in a warning area. That's where technology is, and that's really, really helps us be much more safe. So it may not be quite as reliable as the map when the power goes out, but actually with the batteries, we're doing good. So thanks for listening to me, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Don. So it bears the question, Dorothy, does the cell phone or the Amber Alert in this case might work in the land of Oz? So, okay. Our next presenter is Representative Connie Bernardi, who would like to share with us a resolution that she received today down at the state capitol.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Lund asked me to share this with you today in the Minnesota House of Representatives. We took a moment to reflect back and commemorate this very tragic day in Fridley and the human spirit of everyone who came together to make our community stronger. And I'll read it to you. It's a House resolution on the 50th anniversary of the tornadoes of May 6, 1965. Whereas on May 6, 1965, a swarm of tornadoes struck the western and northern suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul between the hours of 5:30 p.m. and 9 p.m., destroying more than 13 lives and injuring more than 683 people. And whereas the trail of destruction extended from Glencoe to the eastern shores of the St. Croix River on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, and whereas the total property damage in today's dollars exceeded over $1.2 billion, with hundreds of homes and businesses destroyed and thousands of homes heavily damaged. And whereas this horrific tornado outbreak was preceded by a record-setting winter and spring flooding, causing great human suffering in the state of Minnesota. And whereas the especially hard-hit area of Lake Minnetonka, Fridley, Spring Lake Park, and Mounds View found courage and strength from their faith and community to rebuild their churches, schools, and homes in a miraculous way. And whereas renewed respect for the forces of nature from the outbreak of tornadoes has led to increased awareness and diligence in severe storm weather preparedness in Minnesota. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the state of Minnesota that on the 50th anniversary of these events, it takes this moment to recognize the sacrifices, suffering, and losses of those affected by the worst tornado outbreak in Minnesota history, dated May 4th, 2015. Kurt Doudt, Speaker, Minnesota House of Representatives, Joyce Pepin, Chair, Rules and Legislative Administration, and myself, Connie Bernardi, State Representative. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. And many of you may recognize Malcolm Watson has something to share about not only that day, but I think he's going to talk a little bit about 1965 in general. Malcolm?
Certainly, as somebody's already mentioned it. Good evening. Many of you know me already. Either you know me as the chaplain of American Legion Post 303, and some of you have a really long memory, like Bob here, he probably remembers that I was city manager of Columbia Heights. It was my 8th year as manager in 1965. So I got in on everything. 1965 was a truly disastrous year. And there was a year of unprecedented blizzards, floods, and tornadoes. In chronological order, I note the following conditions that contributed to the emergencies and the actions taken to alleviate the problems when possible. Rainfall in late 1964 soaked into our lawns, parks, and open lands prior to any insulating snowfall, which normally occurred in conjunction with that freezing. The whole countryside was frozen to a depth sufficient to discourage any soaking in when the spring thaws came. And then the blizzards arrived. particularly severe in February, and a final one already mentioned on our holiday, St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. Snowbanks were piled high everywhere. March 31st, April 5th, thawing with some rain causes flooding of all low areas, overflowing retention ponds, flooding basements. Calls were made to the Red Cross and to my friends in Washington, D.C. for assistance as many homes were evacuated. Large pumps were brought in and water pumped out of flooded areas. In Fridley, the Mississippi River overflowed into the homes in the northwest part of town. Your city manager, Earl Wagner, and I went up there and toured that area and discussed what might be done in the future to protect that property. Thursday, this is it, May 6th, was a clear day in the early morning, and it became a hot, humid day, typical of conditions that spawn tornadoes. The warning sirens went off as tornadoes were seen in the southwestern suburbs heading in our direction. We went into our basements with our transistor radios, flashlights, and candles. Meanwhile, the tornadoes now dipped down at the Mississippi River and moved across into Fridley, clipping the northern pump plant on East River Road and the homes from 45th Avenue and Main Street on to the north and east. Then that was crossing Highway 100, which is now called Highway 694. Scattered debris over the whole countryside. All of our police and fire department personnel were dispatched to assist in the areas that were struck, and particularly in a search and rescue operation in the vicinity of the devastated trailer park on Central Avenue, where some lives were lost and many people were injured. My fire chief, Fran Bassett, called me at my home and asked if I could come and help him load our big supply of Army cots and blankets onto the truck to take to Redeemer Lutheran Church on Mississippi Street, where many people had sought refuge. We were greeted warmly when we arrived, and we got a lot of help on unloading. It went a lot faster than when Fran and I had loaded it. Then Friday, May 7th, Congressman Clark McGregor came to my office to get a look at the devastation. He asked if I could take him up there and look it over, and so I drove through with my civil defense card in my window to get past the National Guard personnel blocking the streets. They were blocking them to prevent looting. It's hard to believe there are people that are so cruel as to take advantage of a bad situation. But there are people like that in our society.
I want to also recognize the Historical Society Board of Directors for putting on this event this evening, specifically Mary Sue Myers, if she's in the audience, if she'd wave or stand, and Mary Ann Hoffman, and Al Taylor, of course. He is very involved in the Historical Society and the author of the 2 books that you've heard about, and also a special note to Dorothy Garagaro, the current president, and would the First Lady of Fridley please come up here and help me out here. Dorothy, my wife would like to present to you this little recognition of the flowers for all the work you did to make this a successful evening. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you can certainly proceed to the back of the audience or the auditorium and where the refreshments are. And we have a gentleman here that would like to share his story.
Thank you, Mayor Lund. My name is Todd Krause with the National Weather Service in Chanhassen and a Fridley resident for 25 years now. And on behalf of the National Weather Service and before us, the Weather Bureau, just want to express our appreciation to everyone for being here this evening. One of the things that Rob Brown commented on was that Joe Strube, the principal assistant at the time, and then later meteorologist in charge, said that maybe 2,000 lives, said that perhaps as many as 2,000 lives had been saved. There's no doubt that many, many lives were saved that evening, absolutely. One of the things that is so critical during storm warnings is communication. We can issue all the tornado warnings we want, but if nobody is communicating them, then it does no good. The folks that are at radio and television are absolutely critical to what we do when we issue warnings. The folks in public safety are absolutely critical to what we do in issuing warnings. We get information. So much changed that night on May 6th. Not just the lives of the 13 people that perished and the families of those loved ones. But that was the first time, of course, as Rob Brown described how radio is used. It was the first time that outdoor warning sirens were used for tornadoes in Minnesota. It set off any number of local citizen groups. McLeod County, for example, began their sheriff's posse in the wake of their tornado out by Glencoe. Spotter groups, skywarn spotter groups that are watching for tornadoes. Those became much more prevalent in the late 60s. A great deal changed. It really was a very important event in weather history. And so May 6th of 65 is probably one of the most important dates really in the Weather Service. And one of the interesting stories, I'll just relate one, is the assistant radar operator that evening is still alive. I talked with him a few days ago, and he talked about how they were watching all these different hook echoes on the radar at one time, and they had to come out to where the forecasters were. The radar guys were not the forecasters, and the forecasters were the ones who had to issue the warnings. And so anyway, the radar operator came out to the forecasters telling them, we've got a hook echo. And the forecasters were apparently unimpressed. But then there actually was a debate. Should we start the sirens or not? They had never been used. The box to control the sirens had been installed at the Weather Bureau a few years earlier. But there was debate. Should we issue this or not? Should we start the sirens? They did. Thank goodness they did. And so everything has been very important since then. One last thing, the comment was made about our website. I think Rob Brown mentioned our website and information. We've got a radar loop from that night, 1965, so you can see it. We've got, as was mentioned, a very lengthy document with pictures and other such things. That website is weather.gov/Twin Cities. So weather.gov/Twin Cities, and that's where you'll be able to read a lot of information about the tornado.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you need to leave, that's fine, but if you could give the people the respect and quiet so that other audience people can hear, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. And short and succinct is the operative word, okay?
Good evening. My name is Deborah Bandel. I was a student in Miss Kelly's 4th grade class at Parkview Elementary School. When we came back to school, there was a young man, a boy in my class, who was my very best friend, and he was not with us. His family lived over by what's now University in 694, across from where Cub is. A lot of the houses in that area were terribly damaged. I looked for this kid when I got to junior high and to senior high, hoping somehow he would be brought in from wherever. His name was Earl Peterson. He had a very large family, and I would love to know if anybody here knows what happened to that family. That's all I really have to say. Thank you.
And if anybody does know the young lady's, where she's looking for the answers to if anybody knows of Peterson, look her up. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dale Stone. My dad's pastor at Redeemer Lutheran.
You're going to have to speak a little louder, right into the mic.
My name is Dale Stone. My dad was pastor at Redeemer Lutheran. I was a student at Augsburg when the tornado hit, and I called. There was no answer, so I drove from my apartment down to Augsburg. I found out my folks were okay. Then I went over to the church to see who needed help, and there was a man there, a member of our church. He had a son he was divorced from his wife. His wife had custody. After the first tornado went through, she let their son, out. And then when the second tornado came through, he disappeared. So he said, Dale, would you want to help me to look for my son? So think about it. We're going through his house, which had collapsed into the basement, looking for his son. It was really traumatic. And he said, well, we didn't find him there. So he said, my son's best friend is over here. So we went over and went to a second house. And he was determined to do something I can't even mention to his wife if she let him out and his son got killed. Fortunately, he had gone to an elementary school, which was a shelter, and he was safe. We didn't find that out till later in the morning. I also want to congratulate the Red Cross for all the help they did. They set up Redeemer as a place where people could get food and clothing and so on. We had at least many families were sleeping in the church. I'll close with one story. My mom, who is the pastor's wife, Evie Stone, said that she talked with a lady that was sitting on a cot in the basement of the church. She said, we've been in Fridley for 2 years now, and we always planned on coming over to visit the church, but we never planned on coming here under these circumstances. But there's really a lot of love in our town, people helping each other, and I think it's a great town to be from.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bruce Nelson. I'm not going to be able to look at you guys, so I have to look down. I've got a bit of an issue with my neck. Couple things. In 1965, Jim Daly and myself were up at St. Cloud, where we're 1960 graduates of Fridley High School, actually not here, but over at the middle school. We were up at St. Cloud, getting ready, or actually studying for finals. I was listening to the CCO, and he was too. I gave him a call. We were living differently in a different household. And subsequently, I said, I'm going to go. Do you want to come? He said, yes. Well, we drove down, I don't remember, 35W into what is now called Highway 100. So I let him off at so he could cross over right after the railroad tracks by Altura Drive. He lived down there in that portion. Well, I continued upwards on University. I noticed that the major poles were down. We had tremendous, at that time, most of the power came in via University Avenue. University Avenue did not look like that. It looked like a two-lane road. In essence, I got, I think Christensen was over there at University and Mississippi. He stopped me because he was in yellow, and he had a yellow jacket, and he had a policeman's hat on him. McCarthy apparently had just simply latched onto him because he knew him and says, "You're in charge." And that was it. Well, he told me exactly, be careful, power lines, nails, etc., etc. Subsequently, I drove up Mississippi and over to Monroe, and then northward up towards Overton Drive, which is where my parents lived. I had to swing around a bit, but eventually saw the house, all dark, of course, wide open, left the car running, no lights, checked the door was open, oh. And then I yelled, "Mom, Dad, we're down here." Oh, went to the basement door. The house was not touched, by the way, although it was everything else around it. The conversation, "Are you all right?" "Okay, I'm going back up to school." Subsequently, I picked up Jim on Highway 100 and University on Highway 100, and he basically, I said, "How's your parents?" He says, "They're good too." So we're very good. There's a couple other things I wanted to mention, but I'm thinking that this is going to just last too long. There were a couple good things and a couple bad things. National Tea, my brother watched it blow away. He was at the Penny Supermarket, and he watched it just like this, glass over there. Penny Supermarket is now where the OCB is, Au Country Buffet, or was, excuse me. The other aspect was the area that is now, I don't think that was relevant. So I was going to say that the St. William's, because of the tornado, church was planning on doing a major, putting in a church, so they had extra land. In fact, they almost had an entire block, Mayor. And then basically, they gave up because of the fact that they no longer had the funding and the number of people were just not there. So they just stayed where they were in what was called the gymnasium at that point. And then they gave away, literally, the land that's now occupied by Norwood Square, and then the other location that's just north of there. I forgot what the name of the thing was, but it's part of the land, and that would be part of the benefit that would be associated with that. One personal note. My brother, the gal, I'm going too long. I'm sorry. No, that's fine.
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you. I don't want to lose the audience here, so we need to keep it short to 2 minutes if you'd be respectful of that time. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll be really quick. Hi, my name's Corrine Hawkinson, and I happen to be one of the kids that was actually stupid enough to go to the Arts and Science Fair, and I was actually the last group of people that were rescued from the building. And I just want to talk just for a second about those last few remaining moments when you're in the hallway and in the dark, and there were 4 of us at that point in time, and there were 3 kids and 1 teacher, and I was on the end, and I looked down to the left, and there was no wall, and we were in the water. It was very, very, very scary, and there was a boy that I didn't know next to me, and I asked him if he would please trade places with me and sit on the other side of me. And without question, he got up and did it. And I'm so grateful to that boy. And I'm doing this in the hopes that that boy is listening or that you're out there now. So thank you very much for doing that. It made a world of difference in the security I felt, even though it wouldn't have made any difference in the end. But it was great for him to do that. And then the fire department came, and I'm so grateful for the fire department to get us home. So thank you to that boy.
Thank you for sharing your story.
My name is Jeff Squires. I was 5 years old at the time, and we lived on the corner of Washington and 53rd. So for those of you who know, it's the road that runs just south of the Target, and you can see down to the east to Central and to the west to University Avenue. And I remember my folks that day listening to the radio, going outside, looking at the sky, coming back in, radio again, sky, and my brother and I were kind of curious as to what was going on. So after a while, we were able to slip outside and then jump on either a wheelbarrow or something next to the garage and climb up on the garage roof. So we were able to watch the tornadoes come from the southwest to the northeast and buzz by, several of them. And they started out kind of white and then ended up getting darker and darker as they picked up debris. I also remember, for you kids out there, listening to your parents, we're seeing my mother run up and down Washington Avenue screaming our names for a good 20, 30 minutes. And she couldn't hear us as we were yelling because the wind was so loud. So after a while, when the wind got down, we could see a tear in her eyes running up and down the road. And when she finally heard us, she came running over to the garage. And to this day, I can see her, even though both my parents are passed away. And she looked up and she said, "Jeff, Jay, get the hell down from there right now." And I had a sore butt for quite a while. But I recollect those tornadoes coming by, and when my kids were growing up, and they're young adults now, two married, one living out of state, and the youngest one's in college. When the sky got a little green and the temperature dropped and the wind kind of came down, and I'd get on the internet and look at the radar loop, and if the kids weren't at home, I'd get on the cell phones and try to call them, and they always said how paranoid I was. And I just said, get on the internet and look at some of the tornadoes 65, look at the video footage, look at the damage, and then you'll understand. And they didn't. They didn't come home, and they kind of ignored me. So at that time, I realized they were their father's children. So that's my recollection of the tornadoes.
Thanks for sharing. And please try to be respectful of the time here. Thank you.
Hi, Scott. Hello. Look at this. I'm Monica Bubakin, and I live 2 blocks from Mr. Everett McCarthy, Mac McCarthy. Every year we had a big party. We all got to know each other pretty good and rebuilt the neighborhood. But my girlfriend Val is up there. We were 13 years old, and when the first wind came, we watched it and we're going, look at that, look at that, look at that. Her dad came and got her, and then we were watching WCCO. Thank you, God, WCCO. Awesome. They were right on it. They told us exactly where everything was. My dad and I, we were watching things come from the basement, and all of a sudden things started hitting, and it sounded like a train, and it was hitting louder and louder and louder and louder. My dad says, "Let's sit down." By the way, my mom says when we're going downstairs, she says, "We're lucky if we lived through this." We sat down. The whole house stood there for about 3 feet off of the foundation, then just exploded. My dad's Galaxy Ford car was now a convertible. We used our TV console for many years after that. But our house was totally gone, and there was other houses that were just moved. Bob next door, he was also a fireman. He found, my dad had to pull my brother down, by the way. He started to go up. Our dog went with the tornado, and on Osborne Road, he was found on Highway 65, Osborne Road, and Bob brought him back home. And yeah, and we had to have the dog on tranquilizers. And I just gave Scott, we're sort of friends, I think. Anyways, I gave him, in 1981, there was a tornado, and I was 30 then. And it was really hard for me to be a comfort to my children, because all I could do is just look up. I was so scared. So that's really, it's amazing. it's amazing, just the whole thing, how it happened, and just, you know, the things, the memories, it's incredible. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica.
My name is Jerry Radcliffe, and I live at 7350 Memory Lane. We had just moved into Fridley 1st of April, and the storm came the 6th of May. We had a brand new house on a wooded lot. So much for the new house and so much for the wooded lot. I was on my way home from work, and those gas stations by Mississippi, by University there, they had those rental trailers there, and they were flying all over, and I backed up against an apartment building over in Horizon. I got home, and all I saw was the house gone. My wife was laying in the basement. I went over and raised her up. She just yelled. So I tore her cover off of her cedar chest and put her underneath that, put that underneath her. I lifted her up, but I had no place to go, all walls. So anyway, I got in the car, went over to the terrace trailer park, and there was an ambulance sitting there. So I got caught in a tree on the way over there. So I ran over there. The ambulance driver had a guy there with a broken leg. He says, I can help you because this guy is in no direct harm. So he left there. He says, I don't know how to get in there. I says, I'll show you. So we took him over there. We got her in the ambulance, took her over to North Memorial Hospital. And that ambulance driver was so mad because the cars, so many onlookers, wouldn't let the right-of-way go through. It was just terrible. So I had to get de-admitted because they admitted me because I had blood all over me. And then the next thing was we had to find our 5-year-old boy. Being we just moved in there, I was so happy that he knew his name and where he lived. Somebody picked him up and took him over to those buildings on University and 73rd, those fourplexes there, right where Melody Manor signs used to be. And through WCCO, we found him. I think they found him about 11:30 or something like that, and it was around 1 o'clock before the word finally got back to us. We were digging in the basement, hoping you'd find them and hoping you wouldn't find them. And Connie knows, we lived across the street from each other. But anyway, he turned out to be okay. We went over there. My father met me there with their pastor from Wooddale Baptist Church, and my two brother-in-laws were trying to get it in him. They tried to leave his car, take anything you want, but we have to go find my nephew. So anyway, he was okay. Then when my dad was there, so my boss came and picked me up at North Memorial the first time. So he was with me all that time, and then finally he says at about 2 o'clock, he says, I'll leave now if you're okay with your dad. So it was okay. We went back to North Memorial Hospital. They said, your wife is in surgery, and they don't expect her to survive. So there I was, digging in the house, trying to find a boy, hoping you didn't find him, and no, go there and they tell you your wife's not going to survive. So the next morning, by that time her mother from Alexander had been here, we went over to the hospital and she had survived. And they took me in and took glass out of my hands where I was digging around in glass and bricks and everything. But anyway, she is okay now. Her age is getting up with her, and she's having a lot of good old arthritis and things like that. So she's pretty handicapped. But God does wonderful things. And we all survived. And we moved. We didn't move back right away because I didn't know if she wanted to live there. But we moved back there, and we lived there ever since, and we have such great neighbors. I love Fridley. Sometimes we get mixed up because we're in Spring Lake Park School, so we don't know if we're in Fridley or Spring Lake Park. So, but anyway, it all turned out okay.
50 years later, and it still touches your heart.
My name is Jeff Bolger. I grew up on 68th in Washington, and that evening the first tornado came through and demolished our house immediately. We went upstairs. There was nothing left of the house. The whole purpose of me being up here today is I want to thank the neighbors we had, Mary and Jerry Ingelsons. The importance of having neighbors that will help you. They took us in that night. We spent the night at their house and went the next morning over to my aunt's place. But our house was totally demolished. I remember my brother Ron coming up the stairs. There was not a wall standing, and first words out of his mouth was, "Look, Mom, the sugar is spilt." So I do want to recognize the importance of good neighbors, and Mary and Jerry, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Uh-oh, it looks like we've got a whole book here. So, okay. Just be respectful of the time. Thank you.
I will. Hi, my name's Kay Herman, and some of you may know my parents, Mervyn and Eveline. My dad was city assessor here starting in 1961, and my mother was an elementary teacher at Parkview Elementary. So this is kind of 3 stories in one because both of my parents have passed on. I pulled Mom's calendar book, which is the book that he was just referring to, from the shelf after talking to Dorothy a few weeks ago because she was coming over to pick up some slides or a disc that my brother had burned for her of slides and photos that my dad had taken of the tornado with his Argus camera in the days after the tornado hit Fridley. Since Dad was city assessor, he had full access to go anywhere in town. Dad was also able to take colored aerial photos of the disaster because Uncle Donald, my mom's brother, flew from his farm in Chaska to the Crystal Airport, picked up our family, and then flew over Fridley. Those photos you might be able to see at the Historical Society because they're being donated to them. I was 5 years, 2 months, and 8 days old when the tornadoes of May 6, 1965 hit Fridley. Because of my age, I remember being scared and safe at the same time. I remember being under the cement sink with a blanket over us, the weird green sky outside, the rain, the twigs, and other items pounding on the house and the basement windows, and a sound of whipping wind swirling in my ears. I remember after the tornado wanting to color on this big sheet of paper that was in my dad's office over at City Hall because Mom was coloring on it. You might be asking, well, what does that have to do with the tornadoes? Well, since Dad was city assessor, he had the task of determining how much actual damage was done to the city of Fridley. So he asked the engineering department at that time to make a large map of Fridley. And that map was over the height of the door in his office, and it was about 3-4 feet wide. So right after that, Dad, Bob Kirschberg, who was at that time the assistant city assessor, and other men who had normally worked for the assessor's department in the summers, helping to assess the homes, went out in the streets of Fridley to appraise the damage. Every piece of property was then determined as to how much damage was done, from no damage to total loss. I don't remember how the houses were categorized, if they were in 10 or 20% increments, but each increment had a different color. So when Dad or Bob and the other men came back to the street, from the streets, they would turn their cards of the assessed properties over to Mom. She would locate them on the map and color it the appropriate color. Well, me being a child, just over 5, wanted to color on what Mom was coloring on. She reminded me quite a number of times over the years that I was a determined little girl that she finally said to Dad, "Merv, you have to take Kay in the car with you and leave Kim here. Otherwise, she'll get to the map one of these times before I can stop her." Well, because of all the work that everybody at City Hall, the fire, the police, all the parts of Fridley and neighbors did, you could, and then especially with what the assessing department did, you could see how the paths of the tornadoes blew through Fridley. You could see how they skipped houses and could leave one house totally devastated with the next house totally intact. Dad had the map in his office for a number of years, and different departments or people or the city council would sometimes borrow it. But at one time, somebody borrowed it and didn't return it. And I don't remember from my dad what happened to it, but he knows that it was borrowed and not returned. So I know that Dorothy has been trying to find it through the city, through the Minnesota Historical Society, and or the Anoka County. So maybe it's out there, maybe it isn't. But either way, it was there at one time, and it helped to assess. I would like to just read a few entries of my mom's journal, because she would usually write 1 to 4 or 5 sentences, not necessarily every day, but a couple of days, and then this kind of sets the tone for what was going on here in Fridley. Notice that on Thursday, May 6, 1965, she used the singular form. And she had 2 entries for that day, one which must have been a couple days just after it happened, and then one about 2 weeks later. Terrible tornado. We were so lucky. 1,168 partial homes and 347 homes plus 200 plus trailers were totally lost. And that was something that Dorothy had told me she had never heard exact numbers for before. May 7th, just dazed, terrible destruction, 9 calls asking about us. Mervyn took pictures all day. May 8th, Mervyn and Bob surveyed losses to Ray Perbick's wake, to Bergman's and Pa and Ma Herman. And I didn't know this at the time, but Dorothy told me Ray Perbick's was one of the farmers out in the Glencoe area that had been sucked out of his barn and then was killed. Sunday, May 9th, worked on map of Fridley, saw Vice President Humphrey, Governor Lolog, and Senator Mondale. To Pa and Ma Close, to Donald's for Kathy's birthday. May 10th, Kim had no regular school. I first reported to Riverwood, then to work at Parkview. Mervyn began money loss survey, meeting at Riverwood in PM. May 11th, Donald came to Crystal Airport, got view of wrecked Fridley, worked getting school in shape. The 12th, school resumed, Kim on half-day sessions, stayed at Holland's in the afternoon, just completely bushed at night. Mervyn worked after supper. On the 13th, Kim came to school after 1 o'clock. Mervyn took junk to the community fire, viewed slides. And then it goes on from there, but there was many different times of items that my dad worked late, as I'm sure all the city employees and all the residents of Fridley did. But with the weird weather that we had that year, on May 27th, Kim's birthday, had 29 here for grilled wiener buffet, made Kim's lake camping birthday cake, last day of school for children. Kim treated both Riverwood and Parkview rooms. Cold, 40 to 45 degrees, so all had indoors. Light snow flurries on May 27th. May 28th, temperature was 37 degrees, latest snow flurries in history. Faculty breakfast at Aunt Jenny's Pancake House. Engelbrecht's over for supper, saw slides, cold, low 36. And it's just been amazing to just remember that how the tornadoes brought Fridley together. And thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. And lastly but not least, Robert Christensen.
Thank you, Mayor. When the tornado came to Fridley, I was right next. Okay. At the time that the tornadoes hit Fridley, I was then manager of the Fridley Chamber of Commerce and also the manager of Fridley Bus Service. And that evening, we had softball practice over at the Fridley Commons. On the way over, I heard WCCO reporting on these tornadoes that were passing across Lake Minnetonka and headed towards northeast suburbs. So when I arrived at the Commons, I told all the softball teams that were practicing to get on home because there was a good chance that we were in the paths of tornadoes in Fridley. I went home, and within about 5 minutes, my mom and my brother were there. We went down to the lower level, and the tornado hit. And my dad says, well, that was that. We're okay. So we went upstairs, and we looked out the front window, and across the street, there was another tornado right above Rice Creek Plaza, just a solid column. And we said, I think we'd better go back downstairs again. So we went back down. My dad wanted to watch it, and I said, no, we're going to go downstairs. We came back up after that one passed, and all the windows were blown out. We'd been shattered by glass. So we went over to our shopping center on University and Mississippi Street to see the damage. The roof had been blown off, and Fridley Drug Store, the whole front end was gone, and Tyson's Market and so forth. And it was then that Sergeant Fritz came up to me and said, I'm going to deputize you to control this intersection of University of Mississippi and let no cars go north on University or east on Mississippi because there's power lines down. He says, I'm going up to Fridley Terrace Trailer Court, there's major damage, and I'll be back in an hour. About an hour later, I had my car parked in the middle of Mississippi Street. I had a 64 Thunderbird with big tail lights flashing. I had the radio on, and I heard of another tornado coming. So then I looked to the southwest, and it was a perfect funnel right up in the sky, and it was bright green and yellow lightning inside the tornado. And there were a lot of people that were gawking around all the damage done to the shopping center and so forth. And I told everybody outside to go into Tyson's Market and go into the walk-in cooler and stay there. And then I had to move some traffic out of the area, and by the time I got it moved out, I didn't have time to run. So I dove under a city bus bench, wrapped my arms around the pylon, and buried my face in the sand. It veered right at 61st Avenue, and it didn't hit me directly, but I got totally covered with sand in my eyes and everything. So I went over to the police department, and they gave me a yellow slicker to use, sent me back to the intersection. Lots of police cars were coming from everywhere, including Bloomington. I had police cars copying, and they were all handing me these flares that I could use in directing traffic there. And then I looked over to where the Holly Center was, or is, and there was a Red Cross truck. And the night before, the Red Cross had just moved out of Redeemer Lutheran Church because of the flood. They could have stayed an extra day, but no, they left. And I told one of the police officers, go over and check out that Red Cross truck. That looks very different. And they went over there, came back, and it was loaded with television sets and a lot of other things that these people had stolen from the houses around Rice Creek Terrace. I was relieved finally at 5 a.m. the next morning. And the hardest part was seeing people walking down Mississippi Street carrying their loved ones, children crying, blood, all looking for Red Cross. And I sent them over to the City Hall, which was our Village Hall at the time. And no, it was City Hall then. And of course, there was very little Red Cross over there, but there were now a number of other police departments that were sending people over, so they were getting some care. And after I was relieved of my duties, I took a walk over in the area around Rice Creek Terrace, and the one most amazing sight I saw was a house that had been totally lifted off its foundation. Nothing was there except the evening dinner table. Everything was on the table: napkins, plates, ketchup bottles, and silverware, and the rest of the house was gone. So that's quite an amazing sight, and it was quite an amazing evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for hanging in there and listening to the stories from people from the open mic. There's refreshments if they're still available out in the back. Thanks again.